you. Before I became a university educator, while I did my PhD, I was also Chief Executive Officer and President, various roles in the National Council of Single Mothers and Their Children, because I did my PhD on, started looking at single mothers' market behaviour after separation, and when they told me of their stories of violence and abuse and sexual abuse and child sexual abuse, I started to realise that I needed to understand the role of violence in the trajectories of separation. So I have a particular interest in custody and family law, in policy, and I don't come to this as a therapist. I say to people, well, I'm like a butterfly collector. I can pin you on a board and analyse what you tell me, but I'm not a professional who has any pretension to healing. But I am a teacher educator for early childhood educators, and the course I teach is about enabling educators to identify and respond appropriately in a trauma-informed way to children who have experienced child sex abuse. Before I start, I want to say two things. One is that Australia has recently had a Royal Commission, which is like a major inquiry where people are compelled to give evidence into institutional responses to child sex abuse. And I say this because it's online, you can look it up, and it is a treasure trove of stories of people who have come forward and they had thousands of pieces of testimony of adults who'd been abused. They found the average period to disclosure was 36 years. And the institutional abuse context brought up many, many more male survivors or victims, depending, targets. Let's call them targets of child sex abuse. And it did come up with a whole lot of recommendations on how to generate child-safe organisations. So it's a valuable resource if you want to go and look up the wealth of material that it produced. The other thing I wanted to say was in response to families post-abuse, and one of the things that I've recognised in stories of people I've encountered is the role of the manipulation of an offender, particularly one who might come in as mum's boyfriend after she's a single mum. Part of the task of the offender is to isolate the child from their protectors. And there's physical isolation, but a much easier one is emotional isolation. And the offender does that by disrupting the mum's relationship to the child, her protective role. And so a vignette which I'll give that illustrates this is a mum with two boys, primary school age. Boyfriend says, "You go to work, mum, earn the money. I'm good with kids. I'll look after the boys after school. Don't you worry." To the boys, he says, "Let's play silly games. We be silly." And of course, the games were games of sexual abuse. And he said, "You can tell mum, she won't mind." And to mum, she said, when her boys are acting up, "You know, their boys will be boys, and I'm good and looking after them, and you're a busy woman, go to work." And the boys said, "Mummy, I don't like it when he's silly with me." And she said, "Oh, darlings, he's always silly." And they had a mock pillow fight in front of the children. And of course, what the boys went away with was, "Oh, it's true. Mummy does know. I told Mummy, and she didn't care." And I've seen that replicated in a number of cases, and picking up on what Bob picked up with the family law issue, there's a lot of mother blaming. We culturally hold mothers responsible for protection, and we're very quick to, "Oh, mum's boyfriend, you know, she's failing to protect, so we need to remove the children." But there's very little attention in Australia, certainly, and recognition of the role of offender manipulation. And one of the points I make is that long after that abuser has moved on to a new girlfriend with children, those children that were abused are left with, even if they receive therapy, "My mummy didn't protect me." And in the end, that can last for the rest of their lives in ways that they might accommodate and grow through the sexual abuse part of it, but the betrayal and loss that they feel of their mother's protection, I believe, needs specific attention and healing, and we need to, certainly in Australia, have that more on the table, because we have a de facto mother blaming and, of course, single mothers seen as the scourge of the Western world, incapable of hanging on to their man or losing their husband as they want to do. So those two things said, I'll proceed, and what I'm going to present is drawings that have been collected over time, and just some of the features. Now, in a room full of art therapists, I feel like I'm the inexpert one and you're the expert. So you might see a lot more in these drawings than I can point out, and I'm stating the obvious to the art therapists, I'm sure. But the drawings encode emotions and perceptions which enable us to see things and understand things that children might not be able to describe, looking at the composition of what they choose to put into the picture and what they leave out of the picture, how elements of the picture are positioned in relation to each other, the kind of posture and physical expression and facial expression, the kind of colours used, the level of detail in the face, in the physical features in the environment, and of course what the children tell us about the contents of the picture. And of course further to that, it's going to vary depending on what kind of materials the child's using, their stage of development and the skills they bring, their practice in doing drawings, the emotional state they're in doing drawings, their intention, are they in a therapeutic setting or are they drawing a picture at school, and of course how much time they have to do their picture. So I thought I'd start with some pictures that I collected from children who'd been asked to draw the rules at school. So these are all children in middle primary school years, sort of in the 7 to 9 age range. And this 8-year-old girl drew a picture of Don't Throw Sand. Some of the things that I identified were, we have the sand pit, we have the sand thrower and the sand victim of the sand throwing. But we note that the figures have clothing, that they have arms and legs, they have eyes and mouth and noses, all their facial features. The victim is sad. She has the sad mouth. The colour is red to illustrate often a coded meaning of danger. I don't necessarily know what all these things mean. The solid triangle lines as opposed to the dots on the dress. Your art therapist probably will have a better reading than myself. But I'm always interested that the sand thrower is smiling, and her hair is groomed and curled. She's also got upturned feet. I'm not sure whether that means happiness or exactly what it means, but she's got more foot power than the victim of the sand throwing. These are another two drawings from here, and again I'm really fascinated that the perpetrators are smiling in every picture. So the children making these drawings are seeing the act of transgression as in some way being a happy experience for the transgressor. And the victim is represented with the downturned face. I also noticed the green colouring, the scribble over the victim's face. This one on Don't Make Fire and Burn Someone doesn't seem to have a victim in it. There's a happy butterfly, although there is, yes, the yellow. You can't really see it, but she has, the victim there has yellow hair, perhaps encoding colours of fire. But these were drawings that we had no concern that it was not about sexual abuse, it was simply drawing rules, and the children, interestingly, chose the show the active transgression and the negative statement. See this? Don't do it. Rather than the rules of, you know, be kind to each other or be safe with each other, the kind of positive statements about what the rules at school might be, which is the way teachers would normally represent rules at school. We must walk slowly, we must be kind to each other. So the children were picking up the don't do and the transgression rather than the affirmative rule. So just as people are probably aware, some of the affordances of drawing elicitation, we get insights into emotion, we get access to information that's not expressed in words, we get a more holistic understanding of the child's state of mind and being. The child can externalise in some way how they're feeling inside, and we can also use them to stimulate additional revelations of what's been going on. So now these pictures are all drawn by children who have experienced sexual abuse. And one of the features is that the drawings they were doing before sexual abuse often deteriorate and become less organised, less competent than they were previously rendering. This child actually said to the teacher, "This is a man with his dick up to his chin." And the teacher just was embarrassed. "Well, what did you do?" "Oh, nothing. It was just all too awful." You know, she wasn't prepared to acknowledge and hear, and then to ask another question. "Where did you meet this man? Do you know him?" Or anything about the picture. She just shut the child down, and the child later was found to have been sexually abused. But critically, there's a reference in the script of the text, but also in the rendition to genitals, that the perpetrator's genitals are relatively large, and again that would represent the proportionate experience of the child to seeing an adult erection in relation to them. The prominent teeth, again, are a very common representation, particularly where there's been oral abuse of the child. The scribbling style, we see that the feet and hands of the perpetrator are quite disorganised and not formed, and the general affect of the picture is a dark colour. It was done in black pen. This one was a drawing of children, by children who had worked in a brothel in Bangladesh. They had come to a school where they were rescued, and they would send pictures to the board. But when you look at each of the pictures, it's not actually terribly clear in the screen, but every figure has prominent genitals. In contrast, then again, to those children who were depicting normal rule breaking, there was not any kind of reference to genitals, fully clothed, but in these the genitals are represented, and these children were acting out with other children all the time. And it was not really until my now past colleague, Professor Frida Briggs, saw this that she was able to draw the attention of the board to the issues depicted in the drawings. This picture was by a 7-year-old girl who her mother had lost custody of the child to the father because the mother had alleged child sex abuse in divorce proceedings and was deemed to be inventing things as a malicious, enmeshed, etc. mother, like Bob has already talked about and we'll talk about again. It's interesting to me that this is a very colourful picture. She's drawn a picture that, except for the figures, you know, the detail of clouds and sky and tree and flowers and the use of colours is quite consistent with what children will often represent. But again, we see the smiling face of the perpetrator, which was replicated in the drawings of the Don't Break rules. So a clear sense that the perpetrator is being gratified by the action. Again, the size of the penis represented, the girl's mouth and teeth are emphasised, depicting oral sex abuse. And this child went on, she had continuing difficulties, she was removed into state care from the father's care. The mother had been spent time in jail, and then there was a reunification process. So this girl had multiple losses around how the system had responded. So she had the sexual abuse, but then multiple system failures across the family law system, the criminal justice system and the child protection system. This picture, again, boy at school. He's just drawn himself and his name. We see, again, prominent genitals of the child, staring eyes, round, prominent mouth, and the arms in a kind of a helpless, supplicant position. He's not depicted in relation to anything. He's very alone in the picture. And again, the use of dark colours and very rudimentary kind of drawing. This one is, again, a very strange one. The teacher scribed, "My family is good." The words are not really comprehensible, but that's what the child said about the picture. The victim is this little figure here, and you see how she's floating in the air. She's not on the ground, representing a kind of dissociated position. Her eyes are just round circles with no pupils, no expression. She has no arms, again, no capacity to reach out for help or to do anything. She's helpless and isolated. Seen in relation to this figure is the brother who was sexually abusing her. This figure has feet and arms and again a smile, but has a phallic shape. And this figure is, the child said, was the mother. So I'm not sure what was happening in the family, that this figure was the representation of the mother. We don't know, but the child had not disclosed at that point, but this picture stimulated some concern, and in later investigation she disclosed that she was being sexually abused by her brother. This one is two pictures by the same artist, before and after therapy, and I think it's really interesting to see the change in how she represents herself. In the first picture, it's really interesting to me that there's a sun, that these lines up here are the rays of a sunshine. This appears to be some kind of animal. Behind her, maybe a flower, but we see that she has no arms. Her eyes are empty. The small smile, interesting that she has a smile, and colour in her cheeks, but it's a kind of a spooky picture compared to the picture after therapy, where the expression is a much larger smile. She has arms now and her eyes have content, and the marks on the cheeks are gone. In this picture, she was assaulted opportunistically in a public toilet, and I haven't brought the picture she drew of the perpetrator, but the therapist encouraged her to draw the perpetrator and then cut him up with a pair of scissors. And that was part of the process that happened between this first picture and the second picture. So the child was able to kind of gain some control over the perpetrator by using the drawings as part of her therapy and being able to symbolically destroy him and restore her to a sense of herself. So when I work with teacher educators, early childhood educators, I don't ever claim that drawings are diagnostic in the instance of, you can't just look at a child's drawing and say, well, that's child sex abuse. Or it's a start to ask questions, unless the child has, of course, disclosed explicitly in what they say about it. But it should be a case of asking questions And I was very gratified that I had a student on placement who'd done my course. She'd gone out on placement, and the school, the class of 30 children, had been asked to draw pictures of themselves playing sport. She looked at all the pictures, as she had to put them up on the wall, and she picked out one picture and said, "I'm worried about this boy," and she knew nothing of these children, and she had picked out a boy who had been sexually abused and was actually in the care of the child protection system. So it was gratifying to note that the education had been effective in enabling her to identify indicators of concern. Another context is, of course, when children have made some level of disclosure, then drawing their experience enables them to represent factors such as we saw with the one of oral sex. She might not have had the words to explain what was happening, but she certainly could draw herself in relation to what was happening and to provide that detail that she would not necessarily have had the words to explain to others. And in the case of therapy, that externalising experience, that being able to put it outside the self, represent the self on paper, manipulate the experience outside of the self, developing an integrated sense of herself and her own survival and recovery, enabled her to feel that she had control again. She had regained control after the loss of control embedded in the experience of opportunistic abuse. And there's just a few references. This one down the bottom, these pictures, and the chapter I wrote, I've got a couple of books out, Trauma and Meaning Making and Where To From Here, which is for survivors of trauma. The chapter that I did on these drawings was picked up by an ad agency and a child protection agency in Miami, and they did an exhibition for the Miami exhibition, and that's now on Facebook and around the world. So it was actually wonderful to get that material out there as a public education campaign to raise awareness of people attending to what children draw and to use it as a prompt to ask questions, because the people who see drawings like this, I mean, therapists see them in a therapeutic context after the disclosure, after the report, after the finding, but it's really critical that people, mum at home when a child does a drawing, or the teacher at school or kindergarten, is able to pick up and recognise what they're looking at and to know to inquire further. And I think there's a lot that can be done, although there is a risk of raising people's concerns unnecessarily. As one of the men at the ad agency said, I then ran around to my son and saying, "Why haven't you drawn hands on this picture?" So again, we don't want to raise alarm for people, but to understand the drawings can provide a very effective guide to enable us to ask more questions. And where children are told to keep a secret, they often translate that into the verbal not saying, but in drawing it, they're not necessarily telling the secret. And we don't have to ask them to tell the secret. We can ask questions. "Oh, where did you learn that? Where have you seen that?" Is not the same as, "Tell me what happened, tell me who did this to you," which might be very threatening. If they've been told they'll lose their family, or they'll get into trouble, or their pets will be hurt, or their mum will be hurt if they tell the secret. So yes, that's all I have to say. Thank you. I hope you find that interesting.